Okay, so we are in our Semikha introduction. We're still in Semikha introduction, going over the history of the development of oral law. We're now looking into the introduction of Maimonides, and of course, we have to have in mind this is the way he describes the development of Jewish law, and we will have, after we read his introduction, to think of where does Maimonides fit within the context of that story. Because obviously the way he tells the story is not the way the history tells it. It's a little from his perspective. But we're going to go to his introduction. It's on Sepharia. You could find it there. Last week, we got to this, the way it's divided in Sepharia, to paragraph 29. Just to recap, he describes how the oral law was transmitted from one generation to the generation, and how Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the prince, put together the Mishnah, and proliferated. People were following the Mishnah. It was copied and distributed. Other rabbis wrote other books, and eventually, the way he describes the Talmud was the final compilation where where everything was gathered, and Rambam Maimonides divides the content of the Talmud into three categories: the commentary of the mitzvot. Here, I'll go a little bit back. Perush divrei Mishnah u'be'ur amukoteha. It's the commentary of the Mishnah, from which you understand the decrees of Hachamim U'Nevi'im of the sages and the rabbis of each generation, which Maimonides recognizes as an addition by the rabbis, and then the minhagot v'takanot, customs and practices that are a separate category. That category of a decree that could have been a decree for that generation, but it's not a gzera. It's not a decree that comes to add offense to the biblical decree. So according to the division of Maimonides, at least from what we see here, he sees it seems like the way Rambam understands that is the gezerot are decrees that are connected to biblical text, and minhagot v'takanot are local or temporal, based on what they see as needed at that time. V'chen mishpatim v'dinim pil'iyim. Din mishpat pil'i or din pil'i is a concept that Rambam introduces. Din mufla is mentioned in the Talmud, and Maimonides understands that mishpat pil'i as lo kiblu otam mimoshe. It was not transmitted in by oral tradition. V'danu b'hem b'din hagadol shel oto ador b'midot she'atorah nidreshet b'hem. But the great assembly of that generation interpreted these laws and decided the halacha, and arrived at the conclusion. From this introduction, it's not clear whether what he calls mishpat and din pil'i is pil'i from the word of distinct. It's not clear if he sees it as oral law or an additional commentary and the activity of the rabbis. It's not clear from here. But anyway, this is what he introduces as the content of the Talmud. Here in paragraph 30, we read this: ואחר בדינו של הרב אשי, שחיבר התלמוד בימי בנו וגמרו, נתפזרו ישראל בכל הארצות פיזור יתר. Rav Ashi wrote the Talmud בימי and during the life of his son, and he finished it. According to Rambam, there's a final process of editing of the Babylonian Talmud. Not everybody agrees on that. In my opinion, there was no final editing. There was a constant work of the Savorim, the Stamaim, that added anonymously stuff to the Talmud. But he says this: after that time, נתפזרו ישראל בכל הארצות פיזור יתר, והגיעו לקצוות ולעמים הרחוקים. The nation of Am Yisrael was scattered tremendously, extraordinarily all over the world, and they migrated to the far-flung land and to the far islands. ורבתה קטטה בעולם, and there was war in the world. ונשתבשו הדרכים בגייסות, and people could not have traveled because of the armies they were occupying the land. ונתמעט תלמוד תורה, and there was less study of Torah. ולא נתכנסו ישראל ללמוד בישיבותיהם אלפים ורבבות כמו שהיה מקודם. And there was no we lost that tradition of people studying by the tens of thousands as it was before. This whole statement is problematic from a historical point of view, because if we look at wars in the region, there were always wars. It is hard to pinpoint a specific period and say it was more problematic then than before. There is definitely the time of the rise of Islam in the 6th century, but that is almost 150 years after the time of Rav Ashe. On the other hand, in Eretz Israel, already in the 4th century, Eretz Israel felt the shock waves from the falling of the Roman Empire through the barbarians, through the Vandals, and eventually the turning of the Roman Empire into a Christian empire. And the description as Ahar Bedino Shel Rav Ashe, that in the 4th or 5th century, that is when the dispersion of the Jews happened. This is inaccurate. It went on from the Roman invasion to Eretz Israel for over 1,000 years. It was a continuous process that one cannot determine that in that point in time there was more of a problem than before regarding learning the Torah. And also that statement that there were yeshivot, there were schools where people studied by the thousands or by the tens of thousands is not corroborated. So we have a problem with that. But this is what people believe. Some, because of it's described in the Talmud, that when during Yerchei Kala, when people would gather on Tishrei and Nisan to study with the rabbis, you would have there was no room to move, no room to sit. That could be an exaggeration, but it could also be that it refers only to those special times during the year when people would come and attend those seminaries by the rabbis. But during the year, if we judge by the names of the rabbis that are mentioned, we have records of a couple of dozen names from each period. The first, second, third, fourth, or fifth generation of Amoraim. We have 20, 30 rabbis from each generation. Some scholars went to the extreme opposite and decided the whole thing is fictitious. That I had to take at UCLA Jewish studies and I was studying rabbinical studies. They were bent on the idea by one of the scholars, I think it's Jeffrey Rubinstein, I don't know if it was him or others, that there was one scholar who wrote everything. So every time I was trying to say something like the sages or the rabbis of the Talmud, I would correct myself and says the rabbi who invented the Talmud, right? That is how far they took it. So I think the truth is somewhere in between. We didn't have tens of thousands of rabbis, but it was not one. There were in every generation several dozens of people who were qualified to make the discussions and to have their words written down. You could go through the Talmud and look at the names. You'll have 300, 400 names. If you divide it over the 5 generations and Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, you will get about 30, 40 people in a generation. And even them, it's not the same level of activity for each one of them. You have rabbis like Rav Yehuda Bar Yechezkel, who was the student of Bot Shmuel and Rav, and you have we have Rav Papa, Ravina, Rav Ashe, Rav Aha, they are mentioned a lot, and there are others who are mentioned only once or twice. But that is the perspective that Maimonides gives us. So what happened after, according to Maimonides, after the final editing and the sealing or codification of the Talmud, which is in the mid 6th century, אלא מתקבצים יחידים השרידים אשר השם קורא בכל עיר ועיר ובכל מדינה ומדינה ועוסקים בתורה ומבינים בחיבורי החכמים כולם ויודעים מהם דרך המשפט האחו. In each city and country, individuals who are still connected to God gather and study Torah and look at all the works that were written before them, and they know what is the final judgment. So the difference, according to Maimonides, between the Talmudic period and post-Talmudic period is the uniformity of the nation. During Talmudic period, everybody is connected. He doesn't speak too much about the divide between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli Talmud. He paints a picture of more or less harmony between the two. We know that there was division, but after the Talmudic period, we have this. The whole system is breaking apart. You have clusters. You have pockets of people studying in different places. וכל בית דין שעמד אחר התלמוד בכל מדינה ומדינה וגזר או התקין או הנהיג לבני מדינתו או לבני מדינות לא פשטו מעשיו בכל ישראל. Now here Rambam makes a statement that is between the historical and the halachic. He says this: following the time of the Talmud, any bet din that was established in any country and made a decree. Remember, Gzera is a decree that is connected to a biblical concept. O itkin, just a decree or a regulation that is based on the needs of the community of the time. O hinhig, a minhag, a custom, has to do with prayers or positive things that people do. Either for the people of that country or other countries, lo pashitu ma'asav b'chol Israel. Their teachings were not accepted widely over the whole diaspora, because they were dispersed over a great distance, over great territories, and the difficulty of traveling. See, the word yehidim, he goes back to it. They are individuals. They are not part of a system. They are not part of the Bet Din HaGadol. They are individuals, and Bet Din HaGadol shel Shiv'im batal mikama shanim kodem hibur Talmud, and the authority of the great Supreme Court has been nullified years before the composition of the Talmud. Problems with this paragraph. Each paragraph has its own problems. What are the problems here? Let's go start from the end of the paragraph. He says this: Bet Din HaGadol shel Shiv'im batal mikama shanim kodem hibur Talmud. He says that the Supreme Court was nullified or dispersed. 1 second, I want to see who is with us. Okay. He says that the Bet Din HaGadol was dispersed or nullified years before the Talmud was received its final editing. First of all, that is, if we relate the validity of the words of the Talmud to the existence of the Bet Din HaGadol, we have two problems. One, Bet Din HaGadol, according to Maimonides, existed in Israel and had no influence over Bavel, and Bavel did not always submit itself to Eretz Israel. Second, if the authority of the Talmud stems from the existence of Bet Din HaGadol, then the laws of the Talmud that were written after the dispersion or the dismantling of the Bet Din HaGadol should not be valid, right? Where do you draw the line? How do you know what part of the Talmud is valid and has the seal of approval of the Bet Din HaGadol or not? But we'll leave that aside. There's an ideology here, and we'll see that with every posek, Maimonides included, and later on the two, and the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi-ovadia Yosef, every posek has a certain agenda, has a certain ideology, that here in the introduction it is being conveyed. I'll go back to this. When Maimonides speaks of any bedin, any court established in any country after the Talmud, what countries is he speaking of? I mean, if we talk today, if I would read that in retrospect, but thinking this is usually what people do, we think along the lines of our tradition and our current situation. Oh, the bedin, kol medina medina, it's Morocco and Syria and Iraq and Iran and Libya and Germany and Russia and Poland and England and Spain, etc. But you say, wait a second. Historically speaking, for hundreds of years, almost until the time of Maimonides, there were courts only in Babylonia. After the Talmud was sealed, there were local Geonim in Eretz Israel. They did not have as much influence as the Geonim of Babylonia. They were mainly connected to the community in Italy. The community in Italy had its own sort of power center, and other communities in North Africa, in Spain. There were no Jews in Europe at the time, almost in Western Europe. They all relied on the Bet Din of Bavel. So to say, Kol Bet Din, Bechol Medina Umdina, who can we be talking about? We are only talking about the Bet Din of the Geonim, and they did have the authority. When he says, Lo Pashtu Ma'asa Bechol Israel, their rulings were not communicated and were not accepted by the whole nation. Why? Because they lived far away. We know that the Geonim corresponded with people from all over the world. They made it a point to be the source of halakha, that people would have to send their questions to them and get back the answers, whether it was halakha or customs of tefillah or interpretation of the Talmud. Everything went back to that center, to the intellectual center in Bavel. So this again is not an accurate description, and rather Maimonides here tries to establish the rationale for his approach, because what he's going to do, he's going to knock out some of the rulings of the Geonim and some of the rulings of the rabbis who lived before him. Remember that he mentioned the Sharsheret HaKabbalah. He mentioned all the names of the people in this transmission of the oral tradition, but he doesn't say whom received from whom and how. He says just those are all the names, and I will determine the halakha. So how did this decide the halakha? On one end, you could say he did a thorough analysis of each and every halakha, and he made sure that his system is cohesive and all the parts lock into each other. Or we could say that he came with what is called sakina harifa mefaska kirae. He just came with the machete, and in some places where there was the halakha was too convoluted, he just cut it and decided this is what we're going to do. If there is no in some places where there's no solid biblical proof for a practice of the rabbis, he introduces a new concept that the Talmud does not mention. Such he does, for example, with Sfirat HaOmer. He abandons all the arguments in the Talmud about Sfirat HaOmer and he presents his own. So Rambam sees himself as an authority, and he had the prowess, he had the knowledge, the authority to be that new power that decides. Just as now, that's why it's important to establish that between the Talmud and Maimonides, there are about 500, 600 years. It's interesting because it's roughly the same period that passes from Maimonides to Rabbi Yosef Karo, and from Rabbi Yosef Karo to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. So, and between Maimonides and the Talmud is 500 years. between the sealing of the Talmud and the Mishnah, that's 300 years. It seems like that is the time span that it takes for the different practices to ramify, to break apart, to break into different categories, for disputes and questions to arise to the point where someone decides, okay, we have to order. To put order in that mess and organize the house and put everything in place and rule the halacha. So Maimonides establishes his right to interpret the halacha by saying that all those batei dinim in the 500 to 600 years that passed since the codification of the Talmud were local batei dinim. Lefichach, in paragraph 33, he says this: לפיכך אין כופין אנשי מדינה זו לנהוג במנהג מדינה אחרת, ואין אומרים לבית דין זה לגזור גזרה שגזרה בדין אחר במדינתו. Therefore, one cannot impose upon the people of one country to follow the laws of another country. And even within one country, one court is not obligated to follow the decree of another court. וכן, אם לימד אחד מן הגאונים שדרך המשפט כך הוא, and also if one of the גאונים, and that is an important term that we have to look at, one of the גאונים taught that this is the דרך המשפט, this is the law, ונתבאר לבית דין אחר שעמד אחריו שאין זה דרך המשפט הכתוב בתלמוד, and the later בית דין came to the conclusion that what the first beit din decided is against what is written in the Talmud, אין שומעים לראשון, אלא למי שהדעת נוטה לדבריו בין ראשון בין אחרון. We don't follow the ruling of the earlier beit din, but that of the later beit din, whether it's the earlier one or the later one. So now Rambam basically undermines the rule of that one beit din cannot change the ruling of the previous beit din. He says that is within the Talmud, but after the Talmud, the obligation or the loyalty of the beit din is with the Talmud and not with the previous beit din. So if we have a dispute about Talmudic interpretation, and in the first, let's say in the 11th century, someone said A, and the 12th century, another rabbi said, no, A is not good, this is the interpretation, then we go with B, even though he's later. That also gives the authority to Maimonides to dispute the decisions of rabbis who preceded him. Because he would say, I'm not arguing with you, I'm agreeing with the Talmud. I'm not allowed to disagree with a beit din that lived before me, but I'm allowed to agree with the Talmud. So, that is another way for the Rambam to establish the rules for his Mishneh Torah. Also, he allows here one beit din to not follow a decree by another beit din in the same country. So they are independent communities. Now he qualifies his words in paragraph 34. ודברים הללו בדינים וגזרות ותקנות ומנהגות שנתחדשו אחר חיבור התלמוד. He says everything that I said is regarding the additions that came after the Talmud. So it's about 500 years of activity, mainly of the Geonim. If you would look at the halachic literature that was available to Maimonides, it was mainly the literature of the Geonim. Some of the Geonim of Eretz Israel, mostly the Geonim of Bavel, and not so much from Spain, because whatever was written in Spain was also heavily based on the writing of the Geonim. Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi in North Africa, that was Rambam's master's master, sort of, based himself on the Talmud, and his rulings would be according to the Rambam local and not applying to all. But he says, "Kol hadvarim shebaTalmud habavli," but whatever was written in the Talmud, everyone must follow, and it could be enforced, it could be imposed on every city and every country to follow all the practices that are mentioned in the Talmud, to follow the decrees and takanot. Now, this, as we've already seen and we'll see more, is problematic because when you say you have to follow the words of the Talmud not always arrives at the final decision. There are contradicting sugyot. So you have to apply research and determine what is the halacha, what is the interpretation, and so on. But I want to go 1 second back to the previous paragraph. He speaks about im limed echad min geonim. How do you usually understand geonim? The geonim are the geonim of Bavel, and also the heads of the yeshivot in Eretz Israel were called geonim. This is the established term. That is because the title was Geon Rosh Yeshivat Geon Yaakov. Maybe I'll touch. I want to touch this question briefly now. We'll have to go back to it later because Maimonides mentions it here in going back to this paragraph 33. And אומרים לבדין זה לגזור גזרה שגזרה בדין אחר במדינתו, that one bedin is not forced to follow the ruling of another bedin. Now, the famous rule of one bedin cannot override the ruling of the previous bedin unless it's greater than the previous bedin in both number of judges and wisdom, has become an impediment to changing anything in halakha, because the understanding is that, not the understanding, the belief is that we are always lesser in than the previous generation. There's what is called yeridat adorot. We are not knowledgeable enough. So there will never be a bedin that is greater in wisdom than the previous bedin. So that becomes a problem. However, besides the fact that we have to question even that assumption, is it really so that the Batei Din of today are lesser than the previous Batei Dinim? So if it would have continued in that level, we would probably be at the point that the rabbis of today wouldn't be able to read Aleph Bet, right? With each generation being diminished in wisdom. But besides that, there's another possibility to understand the statement of the Talmud. When the Talmud says, En bedin mevatel divrei bedin havero, it doesn't say mevatel divrei bedin kodmo. The Talmud doesn't speak about bedin that comes after another bedin, but rather about a bedin that coexists with another bedin. So that would make sense that if you debate a halacha between two batei dinim, you follow the one which is greater in wisdom and in number of judges. That would make sense. That's like the system of appellation. You go from the local courts to the circuit and then to the Supreme Court. But if you have two courts at the same level in the same city, and each one rules differently, each community is allowed to follow that bedin. So that is something that we'll have to go back and visit, because if we talk about Semikha and about the power of the posek, this is exactly where the power of the posek lies, in the ability to say, we know today things that people in the past didn't know. We understand the sugya differently. We have academic knowledge, historical knowledge. We are facing certain circumstances that were not taken into account in the past, and we must consider them. However, let's go back to Maimonides here. Yes.
So, has there ever been a posek that uses that justification that says, we know more than we did before, or in previous generations?
Definitely, it was always used. Otherwise, we would be totally frozen. But if you look at halakha, you would see that all the time. Yeah, we have a lot of additions. We have a lot of new restrictions. But we have a lot of cases where rabbis reject, disagree, override the rulings of previous generations. How do they do that? So they came up with a rule that is, I think, was originally found in Greek philosophy, and it's called. There is a system like kenanasa omet al kitfei anakim, like a dwarf who stands on the shoulders of giants. That's the idea, shoulders of giants. So the idea is that of cumulative knowledge. Knowledge is accumulated over the generations. So now we reap the benefits of the knowledge of all the previous generations, and therefore they came up with another rule, which is called halacha kebat ra'ei. You always follow the halacha of the later generations. So we have competing forces here. On one hand, you say you cannot annul the decrees of previous generation, and on one hand you say halacha kebat ra'ei, you follow the later generations. So we have this artificial line drawn here as the codification of the Talmud. You cannot change any decree mentioned in the Talmud, and sometimes it creates really ridiculous situations. Take, for example, the decree or the law against shaving on Hol HaMoed, right? This is a decree that the rabbis made, and they explain why they made it. They said that shelo yikanes lahag keshu menuval. People used to shave or trim their beard once a week or twice a month. So the rabbis were concerned about the possibility that people would delay because they would work until the last minute. They were concerned about people delaying their haircut or their trimming to the holiday when they don't work in the fields. So they say you must do it before the holiday, because after the holiday, during the holiday, we want you to look good. Now that people shave daily, what do you do with that? So some people say it's okay, some people say no, there's a decree, we cannot change it. More severe than that is the issue of Shnei Yamim Tovim. We have people celebrate 2 days of a holiday. Now we have the calendar. We don't have the fear, of Rabbi Shlush speaks about it at length in Hamadag and Uzah. We don't have the fear of losing communication or being under the heel of a dictator who would not allow us to communicate or to celebrate the holidays the way we need to. But still we do Shnei Yamim Tovim. When you approach the rabbis and you say it's gzera she'en hatzibur yachol la'amod, my people cannot withstand, it's really difficult. They say, no, why? Our Orthodox community could do it. So the tzibur, the rest of the people, the 95% of the people who don't do it are not considered tzibur. But if the rabbis would have agreed that let's assess reality and let's see what is the problem and let's discuss this thing logically, maybe they would have found that that it is necessary. So before I continue, I see that I got another question here. Okay, that is a. Let me read part of the question because it's important when we speak about the halacha. The Sanhedrin folded in Eretz Israel. It's true. That is in about the fourth century. The Romans forbade the Sanhedrin to continue. Not the Sanhedrin as the Bedin of 71. We don't know that it really existed in exactly that format. We would have known of some of the rabbis of the Sanhedrin. Where are the names of the rabbis of the Sanhedrin? We have no evidence of those particular rabbis. But it seems that Rambam feels that the same authority applies to the Bedin of Ravina and Rab Ashei because the Gezerot spread everywhere. Yes, this is what Rambam insinuates, but there's no basis for that from our sources. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about in that minute about the ability to question and disagree with previous Batei Dinim. Now, regarding that question, does Rambam himself always rule like the Bavli? The answer is no. And that's the interesting thing, that on one hand, Rambam hails the authority of the Bavli, but he rules against the Bavli in many cases. Again, not providing his sources. As I mentioned last time, in the Geniza, in the Cairo Geniza, there were pages found from a book that Maimonides wrote in his youth called Kitzur Piskei Yerush, or Hilchot Piskei Yerushalmi, halachot based on the Yerushalmi Talmud. It's possible, and Rambam had a different way to understand the Talmud. So when he rules against the Talmud, he could always justify himself by saying, I understood the Sugya differently, or I thought that there was a later edition, but he never wrote it. There is a book by Rabbi Benedict, Rabbi Zalman Baruch Benedict, called Harambam Lelo Stiya Min HaTalmud. The Maimonides never deviated from the Talmud. It's an attempt to show that he goes with the Talmud, and I could say that the core, one of the main areas of Talmud study in the yeshivot, at least that's how I studied. I went to a Litvak yeshiva, mostly Sephardic students, but the Lomdus, as they say, the Derech HaLimud was Ashkenazi, was Litvak, and we dwelt on reconciling the Rambam with the Talmud. That's the Brisker way. So, just like the other examples that Joseph mentioned, people claim to follow Ramah, but they don't. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef claims to follow Shulchan Aruch, but he doesn't always does that. So, let's go back to the Akdama of Rambam, and he explains, why do I say that you must follow the rulings in the Talmud? הואיל וכל אותם הדברים שבתלמוד הסכימו עליהם כל ישראל. All these customs that are mentioned in the Talmud were agreed upon by the whole nation. Where? How? We don't have anything to support that. It's the authority that was created by the rabbis and agreed upon by the rabbis. We don't have an agreement of the nation. This is a sort of a projection from a later period, maybe in the Geonic period, when you had an exilarch who controlled all of the Jewish diaspora. There was some kind of a political agreement, but we have no evidence that people agreed on the things of the Talmud, on the rulings of the Talmud. And not only that, he says, "Otam hachamim shitkinu shegazru shenigu shadanu din v'limdu." Those rabbis who made you see the Rambam follows the same formula they mentioned before. Takana gzera hanaga din mishpat. Those rabbis who did that, hem kol hachmei Yisrael or ruban, are all the sages or the majority. This again is questionable if you have the Talmud Bavli on one hand and Talmud Yerushalmi on the other hand. How can they be all or the majority? If they disagree on a certain thing, then you have only the majority of the rabbis of Bavel agreeing, but the majority of the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael disagreeing with that group. So it's a problem to state that we must follow the Talmud because the Talmud was agreed upon by all of Am Yisrael. Here, now we get to the next paragraph on this. In Sefaria, it's marked as 36. Kol hachamim, and here we go back to what we saw 2-3 paragraphs ago regarding the definition of the name Gaon, Geonim. He says this: Kol hachamim she'amdu achar hibur Talmud uvanu bo. All those sages that lived after the composition or the codification of the Talmud and delved into it, ubanu b'lishon bina, lidbonen, lehavin, v'yatza lehem shem b'chokhmatam, and they became famous because of their wisdom, they are called Geonim. V'chol elu ha-Geonim. So the title Gaon, according to Rambam, is based on the knowledge and the literary activity of the Hacham. If he's knowledgeable and famous and wrote books on the Talmud, he is called a Gaon. And where did they live, those Gaonim? Kol elu ha-Gaonim שעמדו בארץ ישראל ובארץ שנער ובספרד ובצרפת לימדו דרך התלמוד. Well, I'll stop here for a second. He says all these Geonim taught us the Talmud. Problem with this statement is that the title Gaon was a title that was created in Babylonia. The yeshiva in Bavel was called Yeshivat Geon Yaakov. Gaon, in modern Hebrew, people understand Gaon is a genius. or a prodigy. But in the time of the Gaonim, the full title of the Rosh Yeshiva was Rosh Yeshivat Gaon Yaakov. The head of the Yeshiva, Gaon Yaakov, and Gaon means the pride of Jacob. Gaon Yaakov, the pride of Jacob. Later on, it was shortened to call the rabbi Gaon, Gaon HaYeshiva, because he's the pride of the yeshiva. But that was only in Bavel. Later on, it was adopted also by the rabbis of Eretz Israel. But the rabbis who lived in Spain and in France were never called Gaonim. Nobody calls Rashi Gaon Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, or Rabbi Yitzhak al-Barceloni, who lived in Spain. They don't call him HaGaon Rabbi Yitzhak or Gaon Shmuel HaNagid.